Check-in review session of CHE210 nutrition, and this is in review of the topics coming into exam 2 of the 4 exams that we have for our course, and hopefully everybody's enjoying into the summer weather. A little bit of rough couple of days with storms and things. Um, so our topics this period have been teen energy metabolism, body composition, weight management, um, and so those chapters 6, 7, 8, and 9 as we get through past a little bit through the halfway point of the semester. Goes pretty quickly. Most everybody is doing fine, getting through mind tap exercises and hopefully finding study outlines, study guides, study it files, things that are helping uh, to learn and think about the material in the course. The next test that be open after our 4th of July break, open for a couple of days, um, will be same format, 40 questions, 100 minutes, 35 multiple choice, and 5 short answer. Remember that um, as in previous tests, you'll be able to, after all exams are completed and graded, you'll be able to click in to take a look at how you've done in for each of the questions. As I mentioned, the last test of the first exam, there was a bit of a curve. Just for people to get used to what the exam's like, the procedures and all. So so you can compare by looking at the actual grade and what you got in the grade book. A little bit of a help there for a curve. The average was 83. And that spanned from about 55% to 100%. So it's kind of a typical um, typical kind of spectrum of how we're doing on our tests. And hopefully you're getting into the groove of how learning how that you should be um, going through the course material in terms of how you learn best in this type of course, meaning it is you're primarily pretty independent. You have weekly assignments, but you decide how you're going about, how you using the material, how you're making graphic organizers, perhaps, how you are um, how are you absorbing the material? You taking notes, making sketches? Are you printing things out or using a notebook to help you out just with key points? It really is important to know how to efficiently and effectively use your time getting through getting through your courses. And you might think about, wow, this is so much material here. How am I going to memorize all this? Well, it's really not a matter of trying to memorize everything. It's reading and thinking about what's the most important kind of concepts here, and then making sure you're very tuned in and attentive while you're reading and going through these mind tap exercises to absorb the terminology, making the connections. Um, and also using kind of manipulative, that is, making some sketches, making notes. That's the way you use your time effectively. And yeah, it is shorter semester, as we know. It's 10 weeks rather than 15. But that doesn't kind of compromise what we want to learn and get out of the course. Also, in taking the exam, do uh, do remember there are rules for academic integrity with regard to back up there. Using the lockdown browser the way it's supposed to be used, that is, follow directions, showing ID, being in a lit environment, and being able to show that you are honestly taking the exam without extra materials, without obviously other phones, computers, people around. Right? That's just a given. If I do question something, you do get kind of email from me asking about certain things and maybe a discussion afterward. Most people are just fine understanding that that's a distance learning course and you're expected to show your academic integrity. So here we are in the coming up to the second exam. This was the sixth week, so it's kind of downhill. We're counting that last week as 11th week, as the 11th week. So the last exam, which is just not a final, that is not comprehensive, but you are learning things that definitely are building on one another as we go through the course, as we've looked at general, what is nutrition, what is good science, how is science communicated, general digestion, absorption, transport, and then each of the three macronutrients. Then the all-important kind of these 7, 8, and 9 really core chapters for energy metabolism, body composition, balance, and weight management, right in the middle there. We then next area, you should take the time to try to absorb these things, make the connections among the 13 different vitamins, and then a host of minerals, major minerals, and then the trace minerals, and so on. And then the final is pulling a lot of things together and looking at life cycle, nutrition. So all these concepts, what's really key and important in the various periods or segments or cycles in human lifetime. And then a final chapter looks at disease prevention, a little bit similar to chapter 9 in some of the content. The exams, just a reminder, the exams are, four of them, 65% each, so something like 15% each, and the ongoing assignments, 25%. In total, there's almost 1,000 points that you have to take from for those MindTap works, and that takes 25%. So hovering over a certain assignment for a long time for 5 points may not be worth. Really just think about what you're getting out of it, and maybe don't worry about going for perfection and retaking a certain thing, but move on and get the most out of the MindTap activities. And then the discussion boards, some really interesting thoughts and exchanges. So I would say, more valuable in what you're learning from reading one another's posts. And as you think about these things, you're pulling together your own personal experiences, your thoughts, and then addressing a kind of an open-ended question. I'm really happy with how everybody's really putting out some very interesting thoughts and ideas. Some of the things that you've been reading recently, and it really really is makes the course even more valuable when you exchange ideas like this. This was from a student recently uh, asking about what do we know about that she'd seen some of this about molecular hydrogen tablets and curious about is there enough science behind them? And I wasn't even aware of this and was very interested and kind of took a dive into it. It's very interesting exploring where this idea came from and some of the published published papers on it. Of course, it's kind of early on in this science, and but that's what science is. It's slow moving sometimes, and it really needs to be sorted out and validated. So something to watch for, and things that are theoretical may not be. Um, really the truth or because we don't know of factors that are other factors that are involved there. There's some theory behind the use of this. Another post talked about these hunger hormones that we're learning about, leptin and ghrelin, uh, and what other things affect them. We have this balance, we have these mechanisms tied to endocrine system and our nervous system. And these are so important, these hormones. And kind of get a little bit of the reading referred to. There's other things that are involved, and not just the natural balance that these hormones try to keep, but also our status in other ways, like our nutritional status, our activity status, our stress, our sleep status. So that's interesting to think about. Another, so these various diets that we sometimes read about or hear about, um, vegetarian diet or a keto diet. These are kind of um, specific diets. They're not what we're talking about, this balance and this integration and all this kind of thing. This is what about in the long term? Are they uh, is are they as good as they might be in the short term? So very interesting. There's things that in all science really that we don't know. We don't even know if we don't know them. Um, so interesting question there to think about. Other countries. Somebody brought up the point that it seems like what we read about, or some of us are from other countries, it seems that there's more of a focus, for instance, in a food system, a delivery system in schools, that there's more concentration on what we might call healthier, balanced foods available to younger students, and that might help develop good habits and what good eating pattern is. Why in the U.S. It doesn't seem that we're following that as much. A good question, and a lot of debates go on about the food that's available, not just in schools, but in cities and places that may not have access. People don't have access to the balanced, healthier foods that you might find in other places. So good questions, good discussions to think about. Make use of the time you're spending um, learning the materials. This is from our study guide, study outlines. Yes, they're very detailed, and it's good to look these over and think about, um, are you familiar with the main points here? And I've on these I've highlighted what I think are uh, the most important kind of connections to make. So, in the area of proteins, those amino acids are the building blocks. What what are these? Okay, there's 9 essential ones that we need on a regular basis. We have these amino acid pools. Of course, we use these to continually make all kinds of proteins. Uh, how do we digest these? Well, how do we absorb them? We can't absorb protein intact. Protein is made up, of course, with long sequences of these amino acids in particular formations. Um, Depending on what protein food source we're talking about. Um, let's see, that second line says, how do proteins differ from the structures of carbohydrates and fats? So is it, of course, through our macronutrient analyses, we know we see structures, we should be a bit acquainted with them. Obviously, you're not being asked to draw a structure, a difference of a protein and a fat and a carbohydrate. Uh, but key things we want to know, proteins, what's that unique feature of proteins? Well, they're different than the others because they have this amine group, which is a nitrogen, and that's key to what's special about proteins and the peptide bond, and and how diverse a protein could be, much more diverse than carbohydrates or or lipids or fats. From these 9 essential amino acids, we can generate in our body, and we do make use of 20 amino acids to build all the different uh, protein structures that we make use of. You should have in mind, you can list 4 or 5 functions of proteins, from structure and muscle to um, antibodies to um, blood blood constituents, that very important protein, hemoglobin, etc. So you should have in mind, think through what's important about protein. Um, this business about positive and negative nitrogen balance. Um, so that's important. So when there's positive nitrogen balance, that means we are what? We're making stuff in our body. We're taking in more nitrogen than what's leaving. Negative nitrogen balance means where things are breaking down for some reason, and there's a nitrogen, mainly as urea, is being excreted more than what's taken in. So it's an rough indicator of status. Are we being anabolic, building, or are we being catabolic and breaking down? So those are terms that are new, that were introduced in chapter 7. Okay, we're talking about protein here, quality of protein. What do we consider a quality protein? One is it needs to be well digestible. That's one aspect of quality of protein. Another is what's its complement of essential amino acids? Does it have all 9? Does it have most of them? That's another part of protein quality. We know that um, most plant protein are lacking in a few of the amino acids. In other words, it's not a complete protein. But that could be supplemented, of course. You put together rice and beans, and you have all amino acids. And cultures have developed these ways of marrying foods, whether known at the time or not, but putting foods together that give a full complement of nutrients. Um, okay. More from this study guide list. What's a protein? It has amino acids. It's made up of sequences of amino acids. What's the difference among amino acids? Okay, that's the side chain. They're all basically the same structure. On one side is a methyl group and a central carbon, and the other side is an acid. Well, excuse me, on one side is an amine group, NH2. One side is an acid, and that central carbon has a side group that differs among all the 20 important amino acids that we have as building blocks in our body. Structures of proteins, they're made up of a primary sequence that's just one after another. What's the sequence of the amino acids? Then there's additional structure that's put together because of the sequence. Secondary structure, how does it start to take its shape? That's very important in proteins. And tertiary structure, again, how the peptides bend and fold and how they, in an aqueous environment like our blood, what do they look like? And then there's, in more complex proteins, is quaternary structure. That's a combination of sequences. And the example is hemoglobin that has four segments or four protein strands, might say, that are connected with an iron in the middle. Protein digestion that takes place mostly in the stomach. We know stomach has, as we learned in digestion chapter, it has acid when it senses that food's coming in there. Gastrin makes acid come out of the stomach wall, hydrochloric acid. That creates a good digestion environment for protein. And the various protein digestion enzymes, proteases, that need that acid environment to work effectively, breaking down the protein into smaller pieces that can be absorbed a bit later on in the GI tract and duodenum. So after each of these sections, I'm posting some good questions you could think about as one or two of these will be among the ones that you'll write a little bit about. That is the open-ended questions. Things like this first one, what characteristics account for the complexity of proteins as a macronutrient as compared to carbohydrates and lipids. I sort of just mentioned that. And so on. You could look at these questions as examples. And if you've read and thought about the mind tap, then you'll be able to have some answers. Most of the time, there's not a single answer that I'm looking for. I'm looking for, if you kind of frame the answer and present a decent reasoning around something. If it says list and describe, then not only list but say something about why you're putting this on the list. Energy metabolism. So this is a bit of biochemistry. And we mentioned the terms, as I said, anabolism and catabolism. So building up like an anabolic steroid, building things, building muscle, building antibodies, just making stuff in the body, as opposed to catabolism. That would be perhaps breaking down macronutrients for use in energy cycles, or to be absorbed, just breaking down into smaller pieces. Some of the steps in our major energy cycles, so that is glycolysis and the TCA cycle, and then there's the electron transport. So I'm sure you've learned this somewhere else. So this is should have some of this in your memory. Some of the main uh, uh, points of interest are, well, of course, glucose is our major energy source. Glucose, we run it through the glycolysis cycle, and we end up with, what do we end up with? We end up with, to break it down into three carbon molecules. We get at the end of the day, we get acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA goes into, well, glycerol first, then acetyl-CoA. Acetyl-CoA goes into the TCA cycle, also called the Krebs cycle, or and that's an essential step. When we make that acetyl-CoA, it cannot go back. It cannot be used to make glucose if we're in that kind of situation. That's why it's a key step there. Okay, this is a good diagram. It's a kind of a nice overall, not completely detailed, but really important. I've been saying glycerol, I meant pyruvate. Pyruvate's the three carbon that comes from glucose up here. If we get two pyruvate molecules. And this is the anaerobic process, the glycolysis, and then here's the aerobic part in the TCA. We get the majority of energy, building ATP, building function out of the TCA cycle, which goes into electron transport, and making our ATP and some water. ATP, of course, is the energy currency that runs everything in our body as we know it. Protein, and from this burger, we get the amino acids, and we can get pyruvate for some of them. The protein we usually mostly use for making stuff. If we need it for energy, that's a last resort. Then we break down protein and with limited kind of function to make energy. That is another energy source, and it goes right to two carbon acetyl-CoAs, so it doesn't go to pyruvate except for the some of the backbone. The key about pyruvate is, as I just mentioned, it can, if we need to make glucose, if we're in a situation, starvation, without taking carbohydrate, we can make glucose. It can go backwards. We could put together pyruvate into making glucose. Why do we need glucose? Glucose is the main energy source for the brain metabolism, and also red blood cells. So if we're starved of carbohydrate, then we have to kind of make a carbohydrate as much as possible, or go into a state of ketosis, where we make ketone bodies that can serve to nourish the brain energy for a while. That's not a long-term solution to the energy carbohydrate lacking situation. Okay, some critical thinking questions. As the body use physiological mechanisms to control energy metabolism, shared pathways. So that was what just ran through there. How does the body use these sources of energy at various times where it really wants to select carbohydrate as the major source of making ATP, but it can use uh, the other energy yielding macronutrients. Oxygen. Oxygen has action influence energy because glycolysis is anaerobic, so it doesn't need oxygen. It can produce kind of at a lower grade using the carbohydrate and chunk and put out some energy. But to get everything out of that carbohydrate or fat or whatever, we need to be aerobic. So for the long run, we use TCA cycle for the energy, and that includes use of oxygen. Okay. Um, and eighth chapter is energy balance and composition. Here we look at things like basal metabolic rate, what controls, how do we use energy, where's the balance come from, as the body know how to balance its need for more uh, energy consumption, and how do we control our well, that's the leptin, uh, ghrelin kind of balance hormones. And then we look at body composition. So body composition differs among people. What's a gross measurement of that? Well, it's certain measurements. You can measure waist circumference, or this BMI uh, uh, is a rough measurement, and that's an extrapolation of potential chronic disease risk. Should know BMI, the measurement of just using weight and height, that we can come up with some number, put it in a classification, and kind of judge the long-term risk of chronic disease. So BMI, just using gross measurements. It's not a tell-all everything, but statistically, it's a quick and easy kind of measurement of um, potential risk. Uh, so if uh, where it breaks down, of course, is if you look at any um, uh, professional athlete, most of them might be falling into the obese category. Obviously, they're not obese, but their muscle mass is such that it increases their weight tremendously versus their height, and we'd come up with some numbers that will fall into the obese category. Obese category is above 40 in that BMI measurement. What's the risk of overweight? So there was a good lecture by Dr. Amir talking about what do we know about obesity and overweight, and how that lends itself to long-term chronic diseases of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, obesity, and those phenomenon. Some other kind of thinking questions. You are what you eat. How true is that? We know it's kind of partially true, um, but it's more complicated than that. It's our um, health status, it's our activity, it's our genetics. It's not all what we choose to eat, right? There's more uh, factors involved there. Uh, and yeah, so individual. BMI used as an indicator of really health risk, not it's not a diagnosis of anything. And chapter 9 is weight management. This was the lecture by Dr. Mir. Risks of fad diets, strategies for weight control, weight loss. The theory of what we think and what we know about fat cells and adipose tissue. We know only in the last 25 years or so that fat cells and adipose tissue is not just an inert kind of collection of fat. It's actually a living organ that has receptors, that gives signals, that gets signals, and interacts with the hypothalamus with regard to satiation and hunger. So this is a term that is you read about obesogenic environment. What is that? That's a good question that you probably see in one of the open-ended question, like what is an obesogenic environment and how might that be modified? Um, weight loss. What are weight loss strategies? What can we see as a fad and fiction? So again, these are really nice ending study guides. These I brought out to make them more apparent. These are called the study it, each chapter having a few pages of this. These, as I mentioned before, used to be in the earlier version of the textbook. They're really nice to for review, and it's take things abstracted right from the text. It's presented in a different way with some questions that uh, you've probably seen some of the questions that I use, some of these right on multiple choice on your exams. You should review those, and that's just chapter 8. It really reminds you of the main concepts that we're trying to learn through through the chapters. Okay, there's the BMI measurement. Uh, Discretionary calories. What's that? So we do, of course, burn. We're seeing in the exercises in MindTap, you're kind of getting a nice glimpse of what your eating pattern is quantitatively. What in general, what's your kcal intake? What roughly is your kcal use? What's your balance of protein, carbohydrate, and fat or lipids? Okay, that was Dr. Amir presentation. And in her presentation, she talked about uh, well, current kind of thinking and where we're unsure of things because of the complexity that's involved in weight management and the association of weight management, weight-related diseases and complications. Uh, and so endocrine, we have the endocrine system, cardiovascular system, GI, etc., nervous system, and all features that can be working together to to present. Okay, so really a lot of interesting stuff, a lot of connectivity among them. Here's some there's some questions we back up a little bit and kind of see, make sure that we're familiar with just the language and types of questions that you might see on the exam. So all these processes we should know by now. Um, so what was maybe new in the latest chapter was catabolism, that is the breaking down of in this case protein or fat or lipid or carbohydrate, breaking down as opposed to um, anabolism, that's putting together, like anabolic, making protein or making um, what we make with carbohydrate. How do we store carbohydrates? Glycogen. So that's anabolism. And metabolism, that's the process of just the total of the chemical reactions, chemical and biological reactions that take place in our body. Digestion. Okay, the sum of all, then that is the metabolism. Osmosis, that was a chemical process that we learned with water. It's the movement of water from from uh, an area of lower concentration of solute to a higher concentration across a semi-permeable membrane. And the body derives most of its energy from the glucose and fatty acids. Glucose, that's all carbohydrate, whether it's um, simple simple sugars like lactose or sucrose, they all get broken down or changed to in the liver to glucose. Glucose then goes into the glycolysis and we start to derive energy from that. So glycerol, that's the backbone of fatty acids. Glycerol is the backbone, and the fatty acids are connecting them, making the triglycerol. Okay, we don't derive directly energy from vitamins and minerals, though they are involved in the reactions and proteins and fats. That's not where. So the the problem here is proteins is not where we get most of our energy. We can get it if we're low in carbohydrate and low in fat. Protein is not normally a place that we derive much energy. Glycolysis, that's anaerobic process. It doesn't generate the most of it, most of the energy would be derived from the TCA cycle, Krebs cycle. This is that's the same thing as glycolysis. So uh, this is that's the wrong answer. It does not. Does not need oxygen. So glycolysis is this process converts. Sorry about that. Glucose to pyruvate is what glycolysis is. It does not require oxygen. How did I got by? Pathway of pyruvate to uh, to acetyl-CoA. That's one step. So pyruvate is the end of glycolysis. So it says three carbons, and then we make acetyl-CoA, and that is an irreversible process. We can't go from acetyl-CoA, which is 2 carbons with pantothenic acid connected. We can't go back to pyruvate. Right? But pyruvate can go back to glucose. That's why this is an important step here, irreversible. Sometimes we do want to make glucose, and that's called gluconeogenesis. When we're lacking glucose, we want to try to make some. We can make some from pyruvate. We can make some also from protein, some protein from amino acids. For oxidation, acetyl-CoA enters the TCA cycle. Okay. Not glycolysis, for complete oxidation. That means getting the most energy out of glucose. We got to go through here. It goes into TCA cycle. Cori cycle, you might remember, though it's not, I mean, it's important in biochemistry. We're not harping on it, but it is a way to recycle lactate. The lactate, it goes to the liver and goes through the Cori cycle and comes back as pyruvate. The body stores energy for future use in which in triglycerides. So it's interesting that to absorb from lipid, and remember that most lipids that we get in food comes in the form of triglycerides. We have to snip off, we have to make those free fatty acids and glycerol to absorb them. And then to store them in adipose, we put them back together as triglycerides. So that's what storage here. We don't store amino acids, we don't store proteins for later use. Protein is always in function, it's doing something. It's muscle, it's cell membrane, it's bone, it's hormones, it's enzymes, so many things. It's protein, it's not energy. And ketone body. Ketone bodies, remember that's we can make them if we don't have carbohydrate, and we want to make something for the brain. If we're starving from not having carbohydrate, we can make ketone bodies from fatty acids, and some of those can go to the brain to fuel the brain when we're short of glucose, which is the main substrate for energy for the brain. Let's see, which dietary nutrient would most rapidly reverse ketosis in a starving person? So that would be carbohydrate. Okay, catabolic, that means breaking down. Which reaction is breaking down something? So glucose to make glycerol. So that's glucose doesn't uh, make pyruvate forming glucose that's building albumin to form amino acids. Okay, so that would be this. So albumin is a protein, a complex protein. The main protein floating around in our blood is albumin. Albumin helps us keep a steady pH in our bloodstream. So we're talking about breaking down, and that's the one that's breaking down. So it's weird that in this is used formation. It's forming by breaking down the protein. The rest are anabolic processes. Uh, Coenzyme. So this was introduced in the energy chapter. A coenzyme, a small part of an enzyme that um, that helps digestion. And lots of times these are vitamins or minerals, coenzymes. What accounts for the higher energy density of a fatty acid compared to the other energy yielding nutrients? So we know that fat yields 9 kcals per gram, and protein and carbohydrate yield 4 kcals per gram. And the difference is the percentage of hydrogen carbon bonds. It has a much higher higher amount of hydrogens per carbon. Yeah, if you visualize what a fatty acid is, it's a long string of carbons with hydrogens, either two or one attached to each carbon, depending on if it's saturated or unsaturated. What is the future metabolism of surplus dietary fat? Okay, so if we think of the other surpluses, if we have surplus of protein, we try to make use of the resulting amino acids as much as possible. The rest we get rid of. We deaminate. We get rid of the nitrogen with excess protein. For carbohydrate, um, we store it as glycogen. And for fat, excess fat or lipid, we store that as adipose. So we store it directly. So it doesn't increase fat oxidation with excess fat. Um, it um, it uh, excess fat breakdown of spares breakdown of body protein. That doesn't tell us about what's the surplus. Conversion of excess fat to storage is insufficient. Well, so excess fat is stored. Oh, is just stored directly. Gram for gram, which provides the most energy, that's fat. Alcohol's in between with 7 kcals per gram. So fat's a 9, proteins and carbohydrates are 4 kcals per gram. So this is, I think this was on the last exam, uh, doing a calculation, remembering what we just said there. If there's a total of 220 kcals, it's 40% of the energy, and 20% is from protein. How much is from carbohydrate? I think I have the uh, so if we have 220, which is 40% of the energy from fat, so you do the kind of rough calculation there, and 20%, then how much is left? So that means 60% is from carbohydrate. So if you do a quick calculation there, 60%, we're asking about 60% of 2,200, and then divide that by 4, we'll get the number of grams of protein, of carbohydrate. Gluconeogenesis, most of that, it takes place in the liver. That's by taking a non-carbohydrate, a non-carbohydrate source, and making glucose. And there's some of the amino acids are called gluco, uh, glucogenic amino acids. So some of its side chain can be used to make glucose. Visceral fat, okay, that's the less healthy or unhealthy fat that um, is stores around the abdomen. And why that's less healthy is it's near many organs and actually could protrude into organs and cause problems, as opposed to subcutaneous fat that's spread more equally around the body. It's not as unhealthy. What is a possible metabolic reaction in a cell? So if we think about these things, so they're all chemical entities of some sort. Pyruvate, remember that's the 3-carbon that we get from glucose when we split it in glycolysis. Urea. Urea is a byproduct of excess protein, breaking down amino acids, getting rid of the nitrogen, and we get rid of it in urine. So that's not possible because pyruvate doesn't have nitrogen. Lactate to pyruvate. So lactate. This is actually something that takes place in the Cori cycle. We say that this is not a reversible reaction. We don't go from acetyl-CoA to pyruvate. It's the other way around. CO2 to glycerol. This is 3-carbon, and we don't really make that in our body, going from carbon dioxide. Fatty acids to glucose. So that doesn't work. So it is lactate to pyruvate. Okay, so that happens, it's called the Cori cycle. It happens in the liver. So some of the structure that was mentioned in the energy chapter, the cell, in the cell, we actually had a bit of, in the protein chapter about protein synthesis even, so it dove a little bit into that. The powerhouses of mitochondria. Ribosomes, that's the one that's involved in using the map from DNA and to make protein at the ribosomes. What's true about BMI? So this is the only one that's really makes is true among these statements, that it correlates, or it may be a rough predictor of disease risk, BMI. The measure of the rate of a nutrient is absorbed and used in the body. So we heard this a bunch of times. That's bioavailability. We'll hear this again with vitamins. It's very, very important aspects of vitamins, that is absorption of vitamins. Let's see how we're doing here. So we heard this before. What's the body most made up of? Its weight is water. So this relates to protein, because it's a complex protein that is hemoglobin. So all of these are proteins. They all have iron involved with them. They're involved with movement of gases or of iron. Okay, this jumps ahead a little bit. Let's not worry about this now, but the FAD is riboflavin. Sorry, this is okay. This is going into the vitamin chapter. That's coming up, so we don't really have to review these here. Let's see what else. Okay, that was just at the end. Okay, so there's a good amount of material. This is among the core few chapters that really talk about important things: energy, metabolism, protein, and weight management. So you should see that these are really intimately connected among one another, the topics in these chapters. And what am I showing here? This is when we go into Manhattan. I'm not a big meat eater, and I don't eat meat here, but this is a great burger place in Manhattan. This is called the Burger Joint. There's 2 locations currently. I think they're open more. But if you're looking for burger place. It's not well advertised. It's between 7th, 6th and 7th Avenue and 56th Street. Anyway, it is really good and a great atmosphere in this place. They got graffiti all over the place. It's actually in a fancy hotel, but you go in, you go through the lobby into this place that's it's really uh fantastic. It's a cool experience. Uh any comments, questions that have uh come up that anybody want to discuss? If if not, just use the study materials as much as possible. There's a bunch of good things there for review, and just as I've been advising, just use your time as you're going through this material with really uh, focus to make best use of your time going through this. Use some graphic organizers, use whatever works for you. And picking up a lot of great material here.